Well, let's get more on this now with Joe Siracusa, a political analyst and professor of security and diplomacy at Curtin University. He joins us now from Melbourne, Australia. Good to have you back with us, Professor. There's no doubt that the migrant crisis on the US-Mexico border is set to top the agenda at this Leaders' Summit. It affects America especially, and to a lesser extent Canada. What do you expect the three leaders might come up with? Is there a solution to this crisis?
Good morning, Oscar. Well, look, this one is the too hard basket. I mean, they don't expect to solve the problem. What they want to do is they want to commit themselves to solving the problem. It's just too big a problem. We got these millions of migrants who are making their way to the United States via Mexico, and the United States is unable to stop them. Of course, nobody ever talks about the problem, and the problem is the insatiable desire of Americans to use cheap Latin American labor. I mean, if Californians didn't want someone to pick the grapes, or someone didn't want someone to do something in Colorado, this would stop tomorrow. But Americans love the cheap labor, and they don't want it to stop, and they don't really talk about it. Now, the problem is for the Mexican president, Lopez Obrador. President Biden wants him to do two things. He wants him to keep the migrants in, and he wants to keep the drugs out. Now, the Mexican authorities are facilitating or allowing fentanyl to flood into the United States, and over 100,000 Americans died of fentanyl last year. I mean, we're talking about a major warlike figures, as a matter of fact. So the drugs I think, are equally important with the migration, and of course the economic policies are important. President Biden and Justin Trudeau want the Mexican government to play by fairer rules in terms of subsidizing certain industries. And Obrador says, you know, why don't we get some of this foreign aid that you're giving around the world? I mean, you know, you're not paying any attention to Latin America. And Latin America has an image problem in the United States. Americans, for some reason, don't take their neighbors as seriously as other people. I imagine if we had Chinese or Russian troops on Mexican borders, America would take Mexico very seriously. Anyway, it's only the first trip by the President of the United States to Mexico, and he used this as a very lame excuse to visit El Paso. And it's the first, I think it's the first visit since Barack Obama, presidential visit. I think President Trump gave it a bit of a miss. Your package there suggesting, the young man suggesting that Obrador liked President Trump more than this guy. Well, Obrador is a populist on the left. Trump is a populist on the right. Maybe they had that much in common. I mean, you'd think there's something else going on here. And look, there's one other thing. I watched closely the protests in El Paso the other day, and a number of the migration advocates and human rights activists have argued that America's policy is skewed on the migrants on the border. Their argument was that if these were Ukrainians, Americans would be letting them in with no questions asked. And then they raised a very interesting issue. They said that maybe America is harboring racist attitudes towards these people. They're not the same as the Ukrainians and others. So these are serious charges for which the United States has no real answer at this stage. But there's a long historical difficult problem with Mexico. And finally here, as a professor of diplomatic history, I got to tell you that all these borderlands that the Americans are complaining about were all owned by Mexico in the 1840s before America took them. I mean, it really is ironical if anybody knew this history.
Okay, Professor, let's see how these talks unfold later in the day. Thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
Okay, thank you.